All right, we're going to dive into a debate that's over 350 years old, but believe it or not, probably has a huge impact on what your church looks like on a Sunday morning. We're talking Westminster versus 1689 federalism. In this whole complex disagreement, it really boils down to one very common question.
I mean, have you ever wondered about that? Why the difference? It seems like a pretty small detail, right? But the answer goes so deep, revealing two totally different ways of reading the entire story of the Bible. So let's unpack the logic behind both views.
Okay, so at the very heart of this are two different theological operating systems, if you will. Westminster theology sees God's plan as one single, continuous story. It's all one covenant of grace just unfolding through time. On the flip side, 1689 federalism says, hold on, the old and new covenants are fundamentally different, especially when you're talking about who gets to be a member. Let's break down what that actually means.
And that brings us to our first major question. How do we even read the big story of the Bible? Is it one continuous plot, with the same core family from start to finish? Or is there a radical shift somewhere in the middle that creates a brand new kind of community?
This is really the fundamental issue. Is the new covenant just the old covenant in high definition, finally making good on all the promises to Abraham? Or does it hit the reset button and establish a whole new kind of community with totally new rules for getting in? Well, the Westminster view is going to say there's only one way people have ever been saved in all of history, by grace through faith. The core substance never, ever changes. But the 1689 view sees the new covenant as a massive shift. It's a redefined community, and membership is restricted only to those who are spiritually regenerate or born again.
So, for the Westminster perspective, this passage from Galatians is absolutely key. The Apostle Paul is making the case that what makes you a true child of Abraham isn't your bloodline, it's your faith. And this creates one continuous family of God, from the Old Testament all the way to the New. All of them united by faith in God's promise, who is, of course, Christ.
Now, for the 1689 perspective, this prophecy right here from Jeremiah is the real game changer. They look at that promise that all members of the new covenant will all know me, and for them, that's definitive proof. The community is now made up exclusively of people who have a personal, internal knowledge of God, no exceptions.
And you can see how this leads us directly to the next question. Based on these totally different ideas about the covenants, who actually gets to be part of the church? More specifically, where do kids fit in all this?
So following that logic, we have to ask about the kids. In the Old Testament, it was crystal clear. Children were included in the community. The big question is, does that pattern keep going into the New Testament, or does it just stop?
The Westminster view will point you right here to the Apostle Peter's very first sermon. Did you catch the pattern? The promise is for you and for your children. They see this as a direct continuation of that family-based covenant promise that runs all through the Old Testament, and now it's just being extended to everyone.
And here's another key text for the Westminster side. Paul calls the children of even just one believing parent holy. Now, they'd be quick to say this doesn't mean the kids are automatically saved. It means they're set apart. They belong inside the visible community of the church, not outside of it. Okay, so that brings us to our third and final theological question. And this is where it all becomes very practical. What about the signs? What about those symbols of these covenants? This is where the rubber really meets the road. The Westminster view sees a direct line, a kind of succession. Baptism in the New Covenant takes the place of circumcision from the Old, but the 1689 view argues for a clean break. For them, baptism isn't the new circumcision at all. It's a brand new sign for a completely different kind of community with different members. And here's a verse that Westminster advocates use to connect those two signs. You see how Paul links spiritual circumcision, having a changed heart, directly with baptism? The argument is that they both point to the same core reality of being united with Christ. So it just makes sense that the logic of who gets the sign should continue from the Old Covenant to the New. So let's just quickly walk through the Westminster argument. It flows like this. First, if there's only one covenant of grace. And second, if that covenant has always included the children of believers in its visible community. Then third, it follows that the new sign of that covenant, baptism, should be applied to the children of believers, just like the old sign was. It's a logical progression. So, after all that deep theology, how does this actually show up when you walk into a church? Let's look at the very practical applications in baptism and the Lord's Supper. But first, a super quick definition. A sacrament isn't magic.
Think of it more like a visible sign, almost like a logo for the gospel that God gave the church. It both points to and confirms the promises of salvation for those who have faith.
So, in the Westminster world, you might have someone like Emma. Her baptism as a baby didn't save her, but it marked her as part of this covenant community. It was like a promise from God was placed on her, a promise which she later grew up to embrace for herself through her own personal faith. And then in the 1689 world, you've got Aidan. For him, baptism is the public sign that comes after a personal conversion. It's the outward symbol of an inward change that has already taken place. It's his testimony and his front door into the visible church.
This table really puts it all together, side by side. You can see the key differences are right there with baptism and church membership. Westminster includes believers and their children. 1689 Federalism includes professing believers only. But, and this is important, look at where they agree. Both sides reserve the Lord's Supper for people who can make a credible, personal profession of their faith.
Now, despite all of these differences, and this is maybe the single most important point to remember in this whole thing, both of these historic views affirm there is only one way to be saved, and that's by God's grace alone, through faith in Jesus Christ alone. This isn't a debate about how to get saved. It's a debate about how God structures his visible family here on earth.
And that really leaves us with this final thought, doesn't it? This 350-year-old debate shows us that how we read the Bible's story, how we understand God's relationship with his people in the past, directly shapes who we call family in the present. It's a powerful reminder that theology isn't just some dusty academic exercise. It actually builds the very communities we call home.